You staying home tonight?
I hadn't planned on it, no.
Plan on it.
All right, we're live. Hi, Kyle, Michael. How are you doing?
Nice to see you, Edmund.
Why are we doing this? What is this? Just the Christmas spirit just taking over us?
A lot of it's Christmas spirit, but also Edmund contacted me a while ago and asked me to be sort of the hip media youth culture guy.
Yeah, you're like our resident music culture expert.
Yeah, I'm only 21 years old, but the 2 decades weigh a ton.
I think this is your last year being young enough to be our culture expert.
Well, unless I don't graduate this spring, I'm a senior at Francis University.
You could try to do that.
You could go to grad school.
Yeah.
I'm
Switch it out for another 4
a big
years.
believer in grad school. It's called the Peter Pan strategy. I don't ever want to go up.
Okay. You don't have to keep looking at the camera. You know, you can look at me and look into my eyes, and Michael's going to have to get closer to the microphone.
Why
don't you?
I'm already that person who has to get closer to the
Mm-hmm.
microphone. So
You listen to a lot of podcasts.
too much.
Why don't you introduce yourself, Michael? People will recognize Michael as the graphic design artist for Ari Shafir's podcast, which I just realized recently, and I totally fangirled about. Did you know this, Kyle, already?
I did. He
Gosh,
made
you
fun
didn't
of me. He
tell me
texted
this?
me. He's like, "Hey, Kyle, look at me. I got more likes on Twitter than you ever have." And I'm like, "Shut up, Michael. I definitely don't care about that."
It's not totally fair because I piggyback off of another comedian's fame, whereas Kyle gets his likes organically. So
That's
I understand that. But
tell everyone a little bit about you, Michael.
So I do graphic design, illustration, stuff like that. It's fun. I just kind of mess around with it.
How do you know this guy?
Kyle's my brother-in-law, so I married his sister. Very contentious. I'm still not sure how he feels about it, but
Depends on the day.
we're getting through it.
You keep looking at the camera. This is so different, Kyle. You're so different this time.
My first podcast, it was easy. It was just
Yeah.
me and Edmund.
Mhm.
No camera.
No, Joe was here too, I think.
Well, Joe was kind of sitting off in the corner. He didn't talk. Christine,
that's
don't
true.
talk. You're in the background. Now, that was good. I liked it. That was easy.
So
This is the big leagues.
I think what makes Song or our commonalities, we all went to Franciscan.
Yep.
So
Fire
that
me
gives
up,
us,
Barons.
that definitely gives us a unique take on the world. Yeah, that definitely like it definitely means we're all of us at this table are going to heaven.
That is actually guaranteed. And that we're also all better than
Have we
anyone
all
else at
taken Scott
Benedictine.
Hahn classes? Or-
I have not.
I
Have you?
Oh, just me. Never mind.
Oh,
I
wow.
have. No, I have.
Oh, you have too?
So we're kind of on that priority list. Like we're all getting on the flight, but some of us are getting on first.
Yeah, some of us get, yeah. Okay, so the reason we've called this meeting is there's some very, very exciting and just interesting news and trends in the world of Kanye,
Twitter.
also known as Ye.
Yay.
Yay.
Who's counting? Me. I'm counting, kids.
Yeah, but you wanted to talk. Oh, show everyone your sweater you're wearing.
Well, I'm wearing a sweater,
It says
actually. It
Bipolar
says,
Express.
Bipolar Express. And I felt kind of bad about it, but then I remember that Kanye proclaimed that his bipolar disease was, quote, not a disability, it's a superpower. And he's a superhero, so.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely that aspect of like the tortured genius where you can only be so good at something without being crazy, and I think this is definitely a modern
Quote,
day manifestation of that.
Name one genius that ain't crazy, close quote. Kanye West.
Wow. So what are you excited about right now? What's going on in the world?
Well, I'm excited about the fact that Kanye is finally getting back in some beef with Drake. And I don't really like Drake because I think of Drake as a lot like McDonald's. Basic. Okay. Well, the haters, unbeknownst, McDonald's is basic. I don't like myself because I like McDonald's. I recognize it as a character.
Oh, we never talked about the whole Scott Miller thing either.
Scott Miller?
Or no, sorry.
Mac Miller.
Mac Miller, sorry. Scott Miller Scott Immel is someone I work with, and I just combined both of those in my head.
We could talk Mac Miller for a little bit.
Yeah, like, because this is kind of similar, too, because you were saying, like, I mean, you kind of wanted to talk about the whole mental health stuff going on, too.
Mac Miller and Kanye are both guys who have struggled with a lot of mental health issues, and I'm personally a big fan of both. And Mac Miller recently passed away a couple months ago from a drug overdose. Now, we
were going to do a whole episode on it.
It's important to note that the drug overdose was not off of a lethal dosage. Rather, it was off of a bad batch of drugs that was laced with fentanyl. So, granted, was he doing illegal drugs?
Yes.
Absolutely yes.
Yes.
But was it an amount that is dangerous? Well, in a sense, yes. But if it was that
that was a dangerous amount. It proved to be a dangerous amount for him.
Absolutely.
But of just just something that maybe he wasn't.
But if it had been an honest batch of whatever drug he was doing, I'm not entirely familiar with illegal drugs.
But also, how dangerous is it if Mac Miller is getting tainted stuff? I feel like if you're an artist, you probably are getting the best stuff usually. So
apparently not. But it brings up a lot of interesting questions because I remember I heard Mac Miller had passed away, and obviously my gut reaction was, "Wow, like I'm really sad." I liked Mac Miller, this guy I've listened to for a long time, a guy whose musical styles evolved as my tastes have evolved, and a guy that I really, really liked. But how sad can I be over a guy who died because of an overdose?
Yeah,
that's kind of
using drugs.
Thought.
Yeah.
So my knee jerk was, I'm sad. And I thought, well, should I really be sad? But also, I can't relate to that. I've never been a celebrity who was offered drugs every day and every night.
I'm pretty sure all of us in the room have never been a celebrity that's been offered drugs.
Give Edmund a year.
Drugs, but I haven't been a celebrity.
Right? So you're saying it's kind of hard to...
Well, I think people unnecessarily judge these guys and you haven't really been in their shoes. I think it's kind of hypocritical to say, oh, well, I've never done drugs. Well, granted, I've never had hard drugs offered to me. Look at the color of my skin. Look at the fact of the glasses I'm wearing. I don't look like a kid who's really been around the block, and that's because I haven't. So I really think it's important for us not to try to judge people who have different experiences than us regarding all of these temptations that we just have not faced.
So what's all the stuff going on that we were talking about Kanye?
Let's talk
about the Kanye and Drake stuff recently.
Well, 2 days ago, Kanye tweets a screenshot saying, "This crap faker than wrestling." And it's a text saying, Drake sent in a clearance request for, quote, "Say what's real. Do you want to clear?" What does that mean? I'm glad you asked. Say What's Real is a Drake song off of his mixtape from about 10 years ago, a little less than 10 years ago, called So Far Gone. And it's essentially a cover of a Kanye West song called Say What's Real. Now, it's the same exact beat, but it's different lyrics. Now, a lot of times rappers, when they're first kind of starting out, will just kind of do these mixtapes where they take other people's beats and they sort of cover them to an extent. Now, when they do these mixtapes, they cannot sell them. They can only release them on SoundCloud or DatPiff or online. Cool. So they'll make these mixtapes. They'll kind of gain popularity. Then they'll make original stuff. Awesome. Now, when rappers get really, really big, they'll kind of go back to their original mixtapes, such as Drake's So Far Gone that made him popular. And they'll pay out the nose for these samples in order to release them publicly just for their fans. If you're a really big Drake fan, you've heard this before. You'd like to have it on Spotify, for example, a place where it's not right now. So Drake's manager goes through Kanye's manager and sends in a request for this Kanye beat. Now, Kanye is upset by this because he and Drake are not exactly on the world's best terms at this moment. So Kanye gets this and he's really upset. He's like, Drake, you and I have this beef right now, and that's fine. Beef's one thing. But if you've got beef with a guy, you're not exactly going to go out of the way and ask him, can I do you a favor right now?
Yeah.
Everyone knows about Drake's beef with Pusha T this summer. Are we all familiar with this? For those who aren't familiar, aka I guess that's what you're supposed to do on a podcast. Drake and Pusha T. Drake adds these allegations of ghostwriters, and everyone kind of makes
sense. Oh yeah, that's right, for ghostwriting some of the lyrics.
That was back since he had beef with Meek Mill. People were calling him out for ghostwriting and stuff like that.
Correct. Now Pusha just kind of dropped these ambiguous kind of shots at Drake on a song called Infrared. Now Drake responded with a song called Duppy Freestyle, and straight up diss track, making fun of Push and going hard at him. And the problem is that Drake's kind of a Nickelodeon rapper. I call him a Nickelodeon rapper because he got his start on Degrassi. Pusha T's a guy who's still wearing cornrows. It's 2018. Any guy who's still wearing cornrows, you don't want it with that.
You're going to get some hate mail from my cornrow wearing listeners.
No, I have infinite respect for those guys. I'm saying I do not want it with them. No. You interpret that as low respect. It's the highest possible respect, but not only respect, but also fear.
Yeah, fear. Yeah.
I didn't even notice that cornrows went out of style until you just said it's 2018. And I was like, I actually haven't seen cornrows in a long time.
Allen Iverson's been out of the NBA for 5 years.
Yeah.
Anyways, Pusha T drops this diss track, and he does a lot of things. It's called The Story of a Didon. He mentions how Drake had fathered a child and not told anyone about it. He somehow got this information. He does all these
with
different
a
things.
prostitute, right? Or no, porn star.
If you want to get into the technicalities.
Yeah, technical term.
Now, this was very controversial, and Drake's reputation took a pretty decent hit from this, and Pusha won this rap beef, per se. Mm-hmm. Drake kind of said, well, I had another diss track that would have ended your career, but Jay Prince, a guy he signed to, told me not to release it, which is really similar to, when you're in middle school and you tell your friends, oh, I've got like a girlfriend at another school. It's like kind of similar to that. So this beef sort of ended, but Drake and Pusha T are very enemies. Kanye and Pusha T are good friends. They're on the same label. So Kanye and Drake are not on good terms, and Drake has the nerve to ask Kanye for the sample for this album that he's.
It's kind of like asking for money, though, right? Like it's basically like he's going to make money off of the streams and stuff like that, of like a cover using beats from Kanye's,
and he'll
music.
Pay him, obviously. But Kanye's at a point in his career where he doesn't need to accept money from people. He's got more money than he's ever going to spend.
And I feel like also Kanye is more of a producer than Drake is, if I'm correct here. Absolutely. As far as Kanye does a lot more of producing his own beats and rapping, whereas Drake is more just a rapper through and through and doesn't do as much on the other end of that.
Yeah.
Now, it's important to note that recently Pusha T performed in Toronto. Mm-hmm. He performed in Toronto, and fans jumped on stage and attacked him, literally, Toronto being the hometown of Drake. Mm-hmm. That's what I love about rap, is that you never see indie artists having their fans fight each other. You just don't see that. You only see that in rap.
Yeah.
And these fans jump on stage and attack Pusha T. Now they're restrained. Pusha T comes back out and plays about a minute of a song making fun of Drake before they're like, all right, we got to end this concert. We're going to have a riot.
Didn't someone get injured really badly?
Yes. The first thing he
died?
jumped off is still in the hospital, apparently in critical condition. So
the first person that did what?
That jumped on the stage attacking Pusha. Well, it's because, if you jump on a stage and attack a gigantic rapper, security's going to come at you. That's why you sort of stay in your seat.
Yeah.
That's also why you have security.
Yeah.
Right.
So what are they going to do?
So Kanye...
So they just wrecked this kid. Yeah.
Apparently. Kanye kind of goes on this rant, and he's also upset because Drake apparently texts him. He'll text him these like the purple devil emoji, which doesn't really seem that harmful, but apparently just trips Mr.
Just
West
triggers,
out for some reason.
Triggers Kanye for
he
some
tweets
reason.
about it pretty frequently. I don't know why, but if it offends him, I'm sorry to hear that. Mm-hmm. And Kanye is really upset by this, right? And he tweets all these things about, Drake's so fake or whatever. Then Drake winds up calling him, and he tweets, Drake finally called. Next tweet, mission accomplished. Mm-hmm. And you see this and you think, okay, he's probably going to let him have the sample. Next tweet, by the way, not clear. Mm-hmm. So Kanye tweets all these things about Drake.
Is Drake tweeting all of it, like tweeting at the same time?
Drake has had one response, which is an Instagram story of the black screen with the laughing emoji, which is very similar to what you'll see from your average 9th grade girl kind of going through some beef where you just do the black screen and the response.
I also get the vibe that Drake has someone else running his social media. Whereas clearly Kanye has nobody barring him from Twitter. No. So
absolutely
no one barring him from literally using Twitter as like text messaging,
right?
And just releasing a barrage of text.
I feel like Drake has a team running his social media because whenever he releases a track at all, there's always some type of clue on Instagram or whatever. Mm-hmm. Whereas Kanye just seems to be shooting from the hip.
Yeah, he's just like up late tweeting.
Right.
By golly.
Yeah.
I
think that's why him and Trump are friends, honestly.
Well, Trump typically will tweet rants early in the morning and Kanye gets it done at night. So if you follow those two accounts, your timeline's filled up.
So I first came across all of this because Kanye was making some comments on Twitter about like being bipolar and having a hard time finding interviews where they were going to talk to him about it at length. And then Joe Rogan, who runs a podcast I really appreciate and watch a lot, posted a snapshot of him tweeting saying like, Kanye, you can come on the show and talk for as long as you want. And I was like, man, that would be fascinating. Right. It'd be so fascinating to have Joe try to like.
I feel like he's kicked up his quality of guest recently. Like he had Deontay Wilder on. Mm-hmm. He had Tyson Fury. So I feel like
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. That broke the internet. Oh my gosh.
For sure.
That was fantastic. That was such a crazy thing.
I feel like in the last couple months.
Apparently like the stock of Tesla plummeted for a little bit there when he smoked that joint. It was so funny.
Was like, he didn't even inhale it. He smoked it like some kid legal who was trying to be cool.
And it's legal in that state. So it's like, it's just so weird. Like he lives such a strange, he's almost made a business of just being this genius unicorn. Mm-hmm. Like it's almost like just because he's perceived as a genius billionaire, like a unicorn company in it, like his brand, that people just are investing tons and tons of money into him.
Well, and also the thing that struck me most about that interview was watching it and feeling like, and like this could totally be part of just kind of his thing on the podcast, but it seemed like he doesn't really think any of his stuff too far ahead. He just kind of does it to have fun. Like when he was talking about the Not a Flamethrower project and all that stuff, it's like, we just wanted to have fun. Like he wanted to make Teslas fun. He wanted to do all of that.
Yeah, he seemed
and
like
people
really,
connect with that.
Yeah, he seemed like a normal guy. Yeah, it was a fascinating conversation. I'm also always just super interested with all the like AI, futuristic, like apocalypse type stuff. Yeah, I can't stop listening to that kind of stuff. Like when he was, I mean, because Elon believes that we're in a simulation already, basically.
Hard simulation.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's what I kind of saw was the whole bipolar thing, and which comes from, I mean, Kanye released an album basically with a lot of that bipolar.
Ye had a lot of themes on that, and Drake famously a couple years ago released a song called "Two Birds, One Stone," where he had lyrics that were highly critical of Kid Cudi, another guy Kanye is very good friends with. It's important to note that, like, I actually pulled up the lyrics when they were talking about Elon Musk so I could read them. He says, "You were the man on the moon." Cudi released a couple albums called Man on the Moon 1 and 2. "Now you just go through your phases. Life of the angry and famous. Rap like I know I'm the greatest. They gave you the tropical flavors. Still never been on hiatus. You stay zanned and perked up. So when reality set in, you don't gotta phase it." Basically, he's kind of going on this little rant about how Cudi, was this man guy, but now he just goes through his phases and he's depressed. Now, he just gets on these medications so he doesn't have to face reality, which is a very baby boomer-esque mentality towards mental illness. And it's also important to know the context of Kid Cudi was literally in rehab at the time of hearing this song. Like, imagine going to rehab for depression and anxiety and hearing people going out of their way to just, like, in front of millions, rap about how you just go this.
Yeah.
That's absolutely absurd. And that's something Mr. West took really seriously and went really angry about. Kanye recently did release an album, as he ends up called Ye, where he talked heavily about his mental illness. And he talked about all these crazy things he did and how it's a pretty cool album because the first 3 songs go really heavily into it. Then it kind of hits the turning point with the song Wouldn't Leave. It's the 4th song down where he talks about how I went crazy. I talked about how, Donald Trump's, this and that, and how I want to be this. And I just got, just slammed in the media. But my wife wouldn't leave. Kim Kardashian, a traditionally very liberal voice in the media, someone who was very heavily supportive of Barack Obama, both in this elections, but also in the midterms, if you really look back.
Yeah.
How she wouldn't leave him, even though Kanye was just getting buried in the media. And eventually ending with the song Violent Crimes, talking about how he finally feels like he's his own personality, has daughters and this and that.
Yeah.
How he finally feels free. But it's really interesting to see how Drake just buries this Kid Cudi character and just people didn't really seem to care. Like, why is that really acceptable for a guy like Drake? You would think in 2018, where we're so quick to denounce that people are canceled and no more, that would have been a bigger story, but really, it really wasn't.
Well, there's this thing that Kanye kept saying in some of the tweets that, like, he won't do diss tracks or he won't do those kind of beefs and stuff, which, I mean, you could argue that just having a beef on Twitter and stuff like that, it could be a PR stunt or anything. It's like the new version of diss tracks. You just take it to Twitter. But I did think it was interesting thinking about the idea that like when you think of a lot of like the classic rap, like battles and disses and those types of things going on, it's interesting to imagine a world where you have more like Chance the Rapper talking about Christianity and like this idea that it's not about, diss tracks. It's not about like gang rivalries almost. Like it's not as, there's not as much rivalry in it. It's more just like just making music.
I think the core of it is honestly really the same that, I mean, back in the days of Straight Outta Compton, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Back in the days, they were releasing diss tracks and they meant it.
You
know? And there's something that's still very appealing to people because it's very visceral and people connect to it because it's very real. Yeah. And so back in the day, they were releasing diss tracks and that was legitimately fighting words. You had East Coast, West Coast, etc. So I think they're still trying to like kind of replicate the core of that. And I think most recently, the biggest kind of like rap beef was MGK and Eminem. And it was, I mean, it's kind of like the white rappers rap beef, more or less. But I mean, people talked about it quite a bit.
Yeah,
so like that
yeah.
same idea is basically like,
Yeah.
if you both can dislike each other publicly and people like what you're making, then you know it kind of boosts both of you for the most part.
Yeah.
Well, it is important to note that Kanye is not a rapper who's ever had this incredible flow, this ability to rap fast or rap hard. He's taken this stance of like, oh, I'm all love and I'm all positivity. I would never do a diss track. But he's never been a guy like Eminem or like Kendrick who can just kind of come in on a verse like you would expect on a diss track. That's never really been his strength just as a musical artist. So while he is supposedly taking this high road, it may just be because he knows he would lose in this.
But on some level, like Life of Pablo, he still had lyrics about Taylor Swift. So I feel like he doesn't do rap beef, but he's still taking shots at other artists.
Oh, he loves beef, but he's never going to release a diss track.
Right.
Which I think is possibly a tad hypocritical because he's very willing to come at and give, beef. With that said, regarding specifically the Taylor Swift line, if you really go back in time, you can see videos of his phone call with Taylor Swift where she gives his permission for specific lines. Now, while the videos are over Snapchat, so it's kind of cutting out, he doesn't give permission for specific lines, including specific words he called Swift that were very disrespectful.
Yeah.
It's kind of up in the air whether or not he really got full permission for that. What I'm getting at is that that's a little different from like a surprise diss track.
Right.
In the sense that Taylor knew that this was happening in a certain sense.
Does drama like this add something to the music when you're listening to it? Or is it more like would you rather there not be this type of stuff? Like how much do you think all of this stuff that's crafted or that happens outside of the music either adds to or takes away from the music?
Oh, it totally adds to me. I believe that rap music is kind of our generation's iconic contribution in the sense that these guys are truly larger than life. Kanye says rap's the new rock and roll, and we're the new artists. And I agree with that because I look at, modern rock. How many modern rock artists can we name really at this table? Like, I don't see Cage the Elephant rocking around getting into trouble the way
it's not
Zeppelin
like the
did.
mainstream music right now.
It's not. And I think that mainstream music and these guys that are larger than life adds something to the spectacle and the show that is like our culture that we're getting. So I think when I'm listening to Kanye or to Drake or to Pusha T, I'm really experiencing not only our culture, but like humanity in a sense that I'm just not when I'm listening to like Death Cab for Cutie. Don't get me wrong. I love Death Cab for Cutie. I love Weezer. I love Arcade Fire. All three of those bands were on my top 5 on my Spotify most played. That's a fact. But the thing is, those guys don't kind of reflect the culture in a way that Kanye West does, which I think is really interesting.
Do you think he's reflecting the culture? Or do you think he's just making the culture? Like, in some ways,
I would go with more of the making the culture in a sense.
Yeah.
Because he claims, if you look back to his song Gorgeous off his album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, he talks about how, rap these inner century anthems based off inner century tantrums, based off the way he was brand. He talks about how he doesn't want to be those anthems based off the tantrums. He wants to be a leader and wants to be a reflector. I think he's doing it. I think he's very misguided in a lot of ways, but I think he is ultimately trying to do what he thinks is best, as wrong as that may be a lot of the time.
And I think even when he released Lift Yourself, that was a big deal because on face value, the song was kind of terrible because the lyrics were totally awful. I mean, whoop-de-dee scoop, etc. But the point is, he's so big at this point that he released a song like that and everybody was talking about it. If somebody with less than 500 followers on Spotify releases that song, no one cares.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Lift Yourself for a second. For those who don't know, the song is this kind of starts off this crazy good beat where he just raps nonsense. And it was a smash hit. Now, why did he make this? Well, for those who aren't aware, Kanye made this really cool beat. And he kind of was sitting on this beat for a while. Then Drake comes out to Wyoming. And Drake actually looks at this beat. And Drake says, Kanye, I would love this beat. I would be great on this beat. I really think it'd be a hit. And Kanye, for whatever reason, doesn't want Drake on this beat. He says, I don't really like this. I wouldn't be this or that. Cool. So Drake's very frustrated by this because he hears this really cool beat and he really wants it. But Kanye just doesn't follow his vision for that. Well, Drake sort of at some point insinuates he might try to make a similar beat with his own guys and like, oh, we'll do it anyways. So Kanye is like, you know what? What I'm going to do? Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to record on this beat. Just spewing nonsense. Whoopity scoop, poop, poop, whoopity. Just nonsense on it. And I'm still going to make a hit because I'm so good and I'm so great. And you can't have it, Drake. Which I thought was really an interesting kind of response to that.
Were you going to say something, Michael? I thought you were going to.
Well, I was just going to say it's like that's kind of like his trump card at this point because I think Drake is definitely comparable in his reach and the amount of fans that he has. But it's that ability to organically create those types of beats that people connect with that he still doesn't quite have because he's still asking Kanye for them. So, I mean, Kanye is always going to have that.
How would you compare two artists like Drake and Kanye's success in 2018? Like, do you do by album sales? Do you do by like, I mean, there's so many different medium or places, channels where the music is getting distributed that it's really weird to try to like.
Yeah.
Well, it's tough because if you look at any sort of sales metric, Drake is going to blow not only Kanye, but really any other modern artist out of the water.
Yeah, didn't he break some records for like the most album sales or something? Or
he broke all sorts of records.
I think Drake is definitely more prolific. Like I feel like he's always putting out something new. I mean, if you look at his albums and the frequency that he's put out albums, it's pretty nuts.
Yeah, so he blows Kanye's album sales right out
of the water,
and partially because he has way more albums, right? Like, doesn't he have way more?
And at least since Drake's really come on the scene, he's producing albums at kind of a faster clip.
Also,
man,
when was the last
13 singles,
yeah,
5 studio albums.
When was
Kanye
the last
has
time
got more studio albums than that? But
when was the last time Kanye toured?
Kanye last toured on the St. Pablo tour, which was my sophomore year of college. So I guess that was 2016 is when I saw him. He canceled the tour early due to mental health breakdown. But it's important to know, it's interesting because Drake sells way more. But if you talk to people who are into music and love music, anyone who's really into the music scene, typically not a big Drake fan. So I think that is interesting.
Right.
Do you think Drake is much more like Drake to me as an outside non-qualified person to talk about this at all? Drake seems much more like pop mainstream.
Absolutely.
And Kanye seems to not really care as much about making a best-selling.
Well, I think also Kanye, started the whole using the voice as an instrument.
Oh yeah, I remember watching that video about that.
Yeah, that whole thing where basically you take the voice and you isolate it as a certain chord.
That was super
part
cool.
of a song, and you turn it into a beat. It's so popular now, and that's really where it started, was with Kanye. And so that's something that I think is really something that turned the industry around, because everybody was like, oh, this is crazy.
It's important to note that Drake even credited when he was coming. If you look at Drake's albums pre 808s and Heartbreak and post 808s and Heartbreak, there's a seismic change. Even in Kanye tweets when he says, I made you, there's no Drake without Kanye. Kanye is way more influential than Drake could ever be. Look at rap pre and post the College Dropout. Pre-College Dropout, we had a lot of situations like 50 Cent. We had a lot of gangster rap. Kanye was one of the first real modern rappers that thought, maybe we can talk about our feelings, and kind of helped usher in the sort of sad boy era of rap that we currently live in, with your Lil Xans, your Juice WRLD, your XXX. All of these guys, all they do is talk about their emotions in a way that, you throw it back to 2000, we didn't really have in rap. If you look at who has Drake influenced, just not nearly the same amount or the I can't think of any person I think, oh man, Drake really influenced that. Not at all.
And what do you think about like those modern rappers like Lil Xan, XXX, Tekashi 69? I feel like those rappers, I didn't know them until they showed up in my Spotify playlist, and then I was like, personally didn't really like them, and I don't know why they were so popular. Like, do you have an input on like how did they get so big? Is there like a market for that, or do you think they're like propped up on some level?
Well, I think it's important to know is that you have to look at the time we live in. For whatever reason, this is something that's super hugely debated. Kids nowadays are depressed and sad at a rate that we've never seen before. And these guys, if you look at their music, it's not positive. It's not cheerful. XXX is one of his top 3 songs, literally just all caps, sad, exclamation mark. I think you talk about how Kanye, we mentioned earlier, how
I think it's that we can only have so many
friends.
Yeah, like meaningful, significant relationships. Like we can only keep up with like about 150 relationships where we know something more about that person than just like their name. We just like know. So here we go. This is Dunbar's number, supposed cognitive limit. What is the actual number though? Oh yeah, to lie between 100 and 250.
Wow. And
the idea is that, or what I found interesting to think about that in social media is that it used to be that, you know, a lot of the people that you knew were just people near you or close to you that you were the most in contact with. So you might not know a lot of graphic designers.
Right.
But then suddenly you're in this world where you can know all graphic designers basically who are on Instagram. You can know all people who share different common traits with you. And I wonder if that's extremely taxing,
right?
You know, to try to keep all these relationships with all these people. Even if you don't have an actual relationship with someone, you might know, you know,
it takes up brain space.
Yeah,
I feel like,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and you're kind of comparing yourself. Your Dunbar number is kind of comparing yourself with all the best of the best.
And I think also, I mean, with podcasting, it's also different. Like I said, like, so I do a lot of work for like comedians and stuff because I never was a podcast person in school, and then I graduated, and you start working in 9 to 5, and you're like, music's only going to get me so far. And so then you start listening to podcasts because it keeps you entertained. It's interesting. And with podcasts, it's weird because if you find a podcast you like, over time you accumulate a lot of knowledge about that person who's podcasting because it's very personal.
Yeah.
I probably know more about certain comedians who do podcasts than I know about someone that I met at church last night.
Yes.
And they're a real person that I can go talk to.
Yeah.
But this person who is on the internet on a weekly basis,
I
have all of this information stored up.
Yeah.
They're probably taking up one of those numbers.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's really weird, like, to think that our communities now with the internet are not physical, like people you're in touch with often. And a lot of times, like what you're saying, they're relationships with people who they don't even know you exist.
Right.
But you're constantly every day, like pulling up these different people, you know, on the internet.
I'll be honest. I don't really like podcasts. And that weird one-way relationship is the reason why. And I don't want anyone listening to this podcast to feel weird. But it's kind of odd to me to think that here I am talking into this microphone and somewhere out there tomorrow, the next day, or a few weeks later, someone's going to listen to my thoughts and like kind of experience me in a weird way because I don't get to experience them.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's just such an odd 2018 thought.
But it's very similar to music, right? Like, I mean, you go into a room with a bunch of mics, you record some stuff, and then someone listens to it. Sometimes, I mean, some of these people, like if you think of, you know, some of the classic rock songs that have just been like blasted again and again and again, like these guys just walked into a room and sometimes recorded just in the first take, and not realizing that this song was going to be played billions of times for the next like 50 years.
Yeah.
It's a very strange thing.
The Beatles and Elvis are probably the earliest I can remember where like you had fans crying at their concerts and stuff, and like they didn't know who they were, but like their music impacted them to such a level that they were so emotionally invested.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's nuts.
That's a good point. No, that is a good point. But I think on some level it just feels unnatural to me because I don't really have many like personal friends who like play music, but I have a lot of friends who like to talk to each other. That's a good analogy since I never really thought about, well, I do have a couple of friends who play music. How do they impact people versus how do I impact
Wait, what do you mean? Like friends that play music?
What I mean when I say that is that like I mentioned, I think it's kind of weird for me to talk and other people to hear me and for them to experience me. You said, well, people play music all the time. You definitely listen to music, even though you don't listen to podcasts. I was like, that's really weird. Never really thought about the difference between talking versus music. Yeah. And whereas I don't really have any close musician friends. I mean, I have one friend who's going to make it someday. Shout out to Paul Swope. But the kid hasn't really made it yet. Yeah. And so the sense that I've never really pondered that relationship of his music versus his fans just because I don't have any podcast friends. So I never really thought about how that's really very similar. And I'm a guy who says, oh, I don't want to listen to podcasts because I don't want anyone else to like influence me. I'll listen to a heck of a ton of music. That's a really good analogy. Something that makes me, consider, man, maybe
it's hard to not listen to someone's thoughts for hours and hours at a time for most of your life and not, like, you have to at least admit that there's some level of impact, whether it's, I don't think it's necessarily like as like cut and dry as like if you listen to someone who has a negative influence, you just become negative somehow. Yeah. But it is, it shapes your worldview. They did these studies too where with people's brains, where if they're hearing someone tell a story, they would have both people have their brains on some like MRI or something, but all the electrical signals going on. And the person telling the story, as they're remembering it, there would be like certain parts of their brain that would fire. And the person listening, the same parts of the brain would fire. So if you're talking about smelling cookies and all this stuff, like the same parts of the brain with the memory for smelling cookies and all these other things would light up.
Right.
And so there's this idea that when we hear stories or we hear someone else's experience, our brain is trying to take that information and use it as if it's our own. And later when when someone would retell a story that they heard someone else tell, the brain scans are almost identical to as if they had actually experienced it. So it's really interesting how, if you think about other people's experience or like their view of the world, literally your brain's just taking it and trying to make it more data as if you experienced it, as if you went through it.
Right.
Whereas if you just read a philosophical statement or something like that, it's a lot harder to, it's not as powerful because it's not the story mechanism that's bringing up all of these smells and these experiences. It's just like it's a logical statement.
I think also the difference between reading and listening is that, this happens all the time with texting, is like someone will text something and they don't type it a certain way and you take it the wrong way and now you think they're upset, etc. But with listening, you get tone. Yeah. And so you can hear someone's, I think, earnestness when they're talking about something.
Yeah.
And the more that you think that they're trying their best to communicate and they believe what they're saying, I feel like the more like you'll extend them kind of that slack where like even if you don't agree with them, you'll kind of see their point for a second because you feel like they're really trying.
Yeah.
Whereas if they just wrote it down, you can look at it on paper and say, I don't agree with that.
Yeah. And I love talking. So, it's really weird to be in a situation where you can't talk back, you can't respond, and you just have to listen to someone talk for 3 hours, Like it's a very strange, this is why advertisers love podcast ads, because it's like, not only is it native to the content because it's literally just the same person just saying something different, but also it sounds like personal. It's like personal recommendation. You're having this person literally say with their voice into your ear that this product is helpful or that you should buy this product. So it's a really strange, I talk about this all the time, but I'm really on the whole bandwagon about this idea that long form podcast conversations are like this new movement of information and news and technology, because it is so different than Fox News, CNN, like 2-minute conversations about ideas. To listen to Joe Rogan just have a 3-hour conversation about politics and the Electoral College and all this other stuff, it's way more fascinating to me because there is room for nuance.
And I think it's also, they put it into plain terms. Yeah. And so it's like taking something that you don't understand and let's break this down for the average person to understand. And so it's like this access to new information that normally you'd have to look up in a library. And now all of a sudden it's in bite-sized form and they're putting it in terms that you can understand and you start to learn. Yeah. And that's a very addicting feeling to feel like you've come out of a YouTube video more edified. Yeah. It's huge.
Oh, podcast sensation is crazy. How it's really taken off in the past couple of years, Podcasts, I feel like it has to be trending up. Just from the how many personal friends did I have 5 years ago doing podcasts versus now? Is it because I've gotten older? Maybe, but not as much. I think it's a really interesting idea.
A lot of people are going to it too because it's easy to produce, and two, you don't necessarily need some type of, like, you won't have some type of corporation or production team coming to you and saying, hey, you need to do more of this or less of, like, there's no real, what's the word? There's no like rating system or any type of regulation by anyone. Like if you have the internet, you can just put up audio files and you can do whatever you want. Like you can make the audio files whatever. And so there's no one to come in and regulate it. So there, you're just like, I mean, Joe Rogan talks about that all the time. He's like, no one can tell me what to do. I can just do whatever I want, and I just post it up online and people listen, and millions of people download and listen.
Like this is going to be on Spotify, man. Like my voice is going to be on Spotify. I don't even like my voice. Spotify's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, it's really weird. And the other thing about podcasting is you don't necessarily need a platform in order to distribute. So iTunes or Overcast or all these other podcast distribution platforms, they don't own the content in the same way. Like videos, you can't, I guess you could actually just put a video up on a website. So I guess YouTube isn't necessarily, but YouTube is just such a massive platform, and there really isn't like the YouTube of podcasts, unless maybe you count Apple Podcasts, but you can find, people use all sorts of other, it's more like web browsers, like podcast apps are more like web browsers.
And I feel like it's gotten to the point too where like radio stations are trying to transition to podcasts.
Yeah, a lot of them.
But it's also kind of too late. So, there's a big thing with, so Ari Shaffir, that's my favorite podcast I listen to.
Skeptic Tank.
Yeah. He does this whole thing where basically he takes someone with a specific viewpoint on the world and just interviews them about their experiences. Yeah. So it's very interesting because you get a very specific viewpoint each episode, etc. But he had basically this whole kind of like Twitter beef, to get back to the premise, but with Howard Stern, where basically Howard Stern was totally basically dismissing him as like, podcasts are this and that. And he was like, no, podcasts are kind of the future, and it's getting popularity. And now we're at a point now where like XM Radio is trying to like start podcasts and get people who want to have shows with them and stuff like that, because why would you listen to the radio when you can just have whatever show you want on demand?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. And you can start and stop it, all that stuff. Yeah.
Also, podcasts are free. I think it's interesting how these guys, these talented comedians like you talked about, guys who are paid to come out and perform, they do it all for free. As music and like comedy in general, you typically have to pay money for and outsource that self-serving advertisement, because obviously any sort of talent will always find compensation. But instead of music where a guy will make a song and put it on Spotify, will pay money to access it. It's sort of that independent business, which I think is just so interesting. Since that Joe Rogan, a very famous man outside of podcasts, like this big MMA guy, sits down once a week, or however often his podcast goes.
It's like 4 times a week. 4 or 5,
7 or 8 times a week for just hours for no money up front, only for his advertising, which I'm sure is super lucrative.
It's a lot.
You'll podcast faster than you can listen to them.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon. Most people that I know who listen to his podcast haven't listened to everyone.
No, you
because
can't.
he's cranking them out faster than you can listen
and they're
to
all
them.
like 3 hours long. Like, I mean, it's ridiculous. I listened to like 2 today. Probably listened to like 5 hours of Joe Rogan today.
That's just so interesting to me how like look at music in general. Like who is the most prolific like popular artist?
Like prolific musician?
Yeah.
That's just producing a lot of
like popular in the real. If I were betting man, I would say this band called Brockhampton. It's a rapper. They've made maybe like 4 albums in the past 14 months. Those 4 albums, that's about 5 hours total. Yeah. What is that? 48 hours of Joe Rogan? Yeah. Like it's absurd how much content is.
It's
being
interesting. Gary Vaynerchuk, who's he's like big into like marketing and social media marketing,
Mr.
and all that
Entrepreneur.
Stuff. He is really big about artists putting out more music. He did this thing with someone where he like told this guy, he's like, for a year, I want you to produce 1 song a day.
Yeah.
For an entire year. And it like exploded his fan base.
He's like Tai Lopez, but less annoying. I don't see any of his Ferraris.
Yeah. That's a podcast, an entrepreneur joke for those watching.
But it would be really interesting to see more artists just put out anything and everything and just display all
I think one takeaway that I've gotten from Joe Rogan's podcast is that comedy is definitely a creative sphere. And so like a lot of podcasts, like Ari's for sure, Bill Burr's Monday Morning Podcast, they use their podcast as almost like a soundboard for their comedy. Yeah. So they get better at ranting because they're just talking to a mic and they're just like hearing their own ideas to themselves. But for me as well, it's like seeing this creative space. And if you give yourself a limit and you force yourself to be productive, you get better at being creative. On demand. Yeah. And so for me, taking that and being like, look, I can tell myself that I need to make this by this time. And whenever I have free time, asking creative favors of myself in a way that makes me produce. Yeah. Instead of acting like creativity is like this muse that you're constantly chasing that only comes around every once in a while. You can harness it and use it when you need it, but you have to practice, and it's very difficult.
Yeah, you got to get on a schedule. You just got to put stuff out.
interesting thought, yeah, because it's such a temptation thing. Like humor and creativity and artistry are something you can't practice. But if you look at, the science and the guys who have really done it, as opposed to, white guys in suburban Texas who are just like, yeah, you probably can't practice that. People are able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a little contrary to our common human belief, but I think it's true, and it's kind of a harsh truth. Because we all want to believe that on some level, maybe we could be famous, maybe we could be comedic, just lightning just strikes. But no one wants to ever really work for that, which I think is really interesting.
Well, the weird thing in the future is going to be the fragmenting of like mainstream, the fragmenting of what is pop. I mean, it's already happening hardcore. Like pop culture is becoming such a weird, fragmented thing. There isn't just there isn't 4 TV channels that everyone's watching. There isn't 4 news stations or even like 1 or 2 radio stations. Like there are kids now. If you're a kid in high school in 2018 and you want to be really into the Smiths, like you just find it on Spotify and you're really into the Smiths. Or if you want to be into K-pop, or if you want to be into whatever you want to be into,
everything's so targeted.
Yeah, there's a whole community about it. There's going to be YouTube channels about it, podcasts about it. Like you can find your whole
world. There's a subreddit for it.
Yeah.
I was just going to make the subreddit joke.
Yeah. I've heard some people say that in the future they think that there will literally be just an infinite number of brands that are created just to uniquely target individuals. So there won't just be a sock company. There'll be 500 different brands under maybe a parent company, but it'll be like a sock company targeting like Koreans who live in Chicago who are between the ages of 20 and you know what I mean? Like, and the logo and everything will all be, and then you have targeted advertising on social media and all these other things. And so it's like, you just literally create a small group of people who are really passionate about this product.
And part of me too thinks that on one hand, like with marketing and stuff, just working with marketing a little bit, it's like, there's definitely that part of targeting that's very effective, but I think we're getting to the tipping point of saturation where it's effective, and then at some point there's going to be some amount where all of a sudden no one believes anything anymore, and it's not effective.
Yeah.
True. Like for example, in like the 1990s, 1993, telemarketing was pretty profitable.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting robocalls every 35 minutes, and I answer it and I hang up immediately because I don't recognize the number.
Well, I think what happens every time with that kind of stuff is everyone just moves to the next. I mean, when telemarketing becomes less effective, people are moving to innovating to new areas, right? Like,
I wish they would, because my phone is ringing off.
I heard someone say that there is so much ad money for podcasts. They're like, I forget how someone said this. They said basically, if you did the math with the number of podcasts that are out there right now, which are, I mean, tons and tons, thousands. But if you look at the amount of ad revenue that companies are willing to spend on podcasts, there aren't enough podcasts for the amount of money. Isn't that crazy?
There's Topo Chico.
Yeah, does the show have ads?
No, not really. I mean, not really. I mean, I
Topo
can.
Chico's a front runner.
I know, right? I will take ads. I have a place where people can say that they want to pay for an ad spot or something if it matches. But I haven't really. I mean, I do some like affiliate stuff, but not a whole lot. But like, if you just think that with podcasts, we're in a situation where it's flipped. Like, like on YouTube, there's thousands of YouTube channels trying to get ad revenue. And the opposite is true on podcasts. There's not enough shows for all the money that these companies want to pour into podcasts. And there's not even a ton of companies. Like if you think of all the huge corporations and I mean, McDonald's isn't getting ads on podcasts, but I'm sure it will come, right? Like in the same way TV and radio and all that stuff,
for sure,
it just gets saturated by those companies.
I'm very proud of the fact that I don't have Blue Apron. So.
Yeah, right.
They've been pitching to me for a long time.
Oh my gosh, Squarespace, Blue Apron, it's just ridiculous.
I do have Squarespace, so I folded there.
Yeah, me too.
I got a question, Edmund.
Okay.
I was at lunch the other day and I was talking to this girl, and I must have really been making her laugh. She's like, Kyle, you should make a podcast. I was like, well, I don't know about that. And she's like, why not? I said, well, I have a certain amount of jokes that just come to me, a certain amount of theories, and I just express them in my day-to-day life. I'm worried that if I had a podcast, anyone who listen to my podcast will think I was just boring in real life. Edmund, as a man who has a podcast...
Wait, you think people would think you're boring in real life?
Well, because think about it. If you heard my podcast twice a week or whatever, you saw me in real life, I don't have anything creative to say.
Oh, you mean it's kind of like comedians where, people say, what do you do? And you say, you're a comedian. And someone's like, oh, make me laugh.
No.
You're not that funny.
No, not like that at all. If you listen to my podcast every 2 weeks, I would see you. I only see Edmund maybe once every 6 months, so because I'm a college student. you would already know what's up with my life. You would have no questions. Would like, as someone who has a podcast, do you feel like that weird disconnect in like your personal life? Because like I only have so many jokes, and I like to save them for real life, not just for like the weird internet.
Not really. Well, first of all, like no one listens to this podcast, but secondly, like no, I mean, it's
hey, 2 people
Caitlin
tweeted
Bishop
about me.
listens to this podcast.
Yeah,
Two people-
Just one person.
yeah, my mom and Caitlin Bishop.
I'm pretty mad about this, Caitlin Bishop. I had lunch with this girl, and she didn't even realize I was on the podcast. I was like, damn,
Yeah.
what's the point of even coming on here if I don't have?
No, I don't
friends?
think that's a thing. I mean, I think people. I mean, when you hang out with people, you act and talk
A little
completely
different.
differently than when you're on a podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, it is very similar in that, but it's not the same.
There's definitely episodes of Joe Rogan where it's like, okay, I've heard this in like 3 other podcasts.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that thing where like even someone who's as like propelled as he is in that sphere,
Yeah.
he still circles back around to a lot of the same topics. I think I've heard him talk about chimpanzees like
Yes.
8 different times.
Yes.
So like,
Yeah.
you're definitely going to go back to those comfortable
Yeah.
topics for
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I'm still interested in this, so
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
keep talking about
But
it.
it's the same. I think it's the same in real life too. Like I'm also. I mean, I would say unashamedly, but it's not true. I am ashamedly a very huge Gary Vaynerchuk fan. Just because I feel like a lot of the stuff he says makes a lot of sense. And one thing he says is that social media isn't changing us. It's just exposing us. Like, and social media is just a different way. Like, it's the same type of human interaction.
It's a mirror. I
Yeah.
mean,
And it's the same type of human interaction just on the internet. So, like, when I don't even know what the point. What were we talking about?
I'm saying,
Why-
like,
what'd you-
We're talking
podcast,
about,
no jokes left.
Joe
Oh, you're
Rogan
saying
circling
yeah.
back to the same
so
topics.
like it's the same thing on social media. Like it's the same type of interactions where you're talking about things, but it's just on the internet. Like it's you get tired of your friends' posts, you get tired of your friends' jokes in person.
And the same thing too with like targeting and like people. I think there's been a lot of people talking about like kind of like the state of affairs recently, as far as like what's the culture like? Are we more angry than we ever have been with politics, all this stuff? And I think a lot of it does come down to ad targeting because I think a lot of times people who are selling us stuff, they could make us happy, but they can make us angry faster.
Yeah.
And they get the same type of response that motivates you to do something. They just do it by pissing you off.
Yeah. I've talked before, I think somewhere about, I really think, I'm thinking about my kids and as they're growing up, they're going to have to learn this like virtue of cultivating the type of information that's coming to them. Because if you're not proactive about the type of information that's coming to you, it's very easy for you to just end up in a little like sphere of like in a little ghetto almost.
Yeah.
Like I think they did some study where if you clicked on a specific YouTube video and you kept clicking related content, it was like only a matter of time before you found the most radical. Like if you clicked like some type of video that's like conservatism, it was only a matter of time before you on videos that were about like genocide and like
Alex Jones.
Yeah, like Alex Jones.
Infowars.com.
Yeah, because and it's just the algorithm is trying to find more of the same.
Right.
But it ends up not just being more equally the same, it becomes the radicalized
Always
version
escalates.
of it. Yeah.
What did you think about the whole Infowars being censored and taken off YouTube? Like, what do you think, like the deplatforming of those opinions? Because on one hand, I feel like it's weird because you have free speech as a right.
Yeah.
But then what happens when you go to platforms? And platforms have the ability to take you off because on one hand, it's like he may have been crazy, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have the right to say crazy things.
Yeah, I think it's really complicated. I've talked about this a lot with some of my friends, and I think it starts getting real. I think there's a lot of things to be concerned and scared about when someone starts just removing things without any. I think the Alex Jones thing is not as scary as other channels that are not as popular getting flagged, or like the whole Sam Harris, and he brought on some other guest and it was just flagged as hate speech and it was just them talking about ideas.
Right.
Alex Jones is pretty radical and crazy. So
sure.
maybe someone could make the argument that he's like, it's like the equivalent of shouting fire in a burn. Like if he's saying like, if he's the type of person, like Joe was talking about, someone went into a pizza restaurant with a gun as a result of Alex Jones talking about this whole child pizza sex.
Pizzagate. Right.
Yeah.
It's the sort of thing where Alex Jones, you look at Alex Jones and think, this guy was pretty crazy. Maybe he shouldn't be allowed to talk. But I just worry, like, how do you draw that line?
Exactly.
Right? You can't just draw a line right at Alex Jones because, unfortunately, people's hour-long podcasts don't have a rating of craziness on them. It's all sort of subjective.
Yeah.
And I worry about, okay, well, this guy is definitely crazy, but what about this guy? Maybe not this guy, but I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe this YouTube reporter's having a bad day and is nixing people.
Yeah.
And I kind of hate that idea of censorship of ideas. Don't get me wrong. A lot of ideas are awful and probably should be censored, but it's just such fundamentally a slippery slope of we can't quantify these 2-hour-long Joe Rogan podcasts into craziness scores.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying I know the answers because I don't. I'm not even a college graduate. But fundamentally, it's really tough for these media companies to call these shots.
Yeah, well, I think the thing with Alex Jones was he was basically saying that some of the killings were like faked or
Sandy Hook
like
yeah,
Sandy Hook
like-
shootings
yeah.
were fake, stuff like that.
And so it's like at what point does someone with a certain level of influence have a responsibility to the truth or have a responsibility? Like if, like you said, if you're in rehab and suddenly someone with a massive audience is saying that you shouldn't be in rehab, at what point does that incur some type of damage?
And I think it's one of those things too where like the whole Sandy Hook thing, I think it's a legitimate theory. So I think it's one thing to have a theory.
Yeah.
It's another thing to have a following.
Yeah.
And to be saying that theory like it's the gospel truth.
Yeah, like saying it is true.
And to be convincing people of it.
Yeah.
So I think on one hand, like I wasn't there, you never know, like any X, Y, and Z could have happened, anything could have happened.
Yeah.
But to be proclaiming something like exactly what happened to an audience that believes you, that's where you have more responsibility than others.
Yeah. And but I do agree that it is not a good sign when a company as massive as YouTube is able to just remove you and censor you without much due process or
it's the
explanation.
Principle of it that's troubling.
Yeah, that's what gets scary. And I know there are tons of stories of different channels and stuff getting either demonetized or kicked off completely or flagged for just really weird things. And what's scary about it, and Joe Rogan talks about it all the time, what's scary about it is it seems to all skew towards conservative. Like it's the more conservative voices that are getting all the silencing. And the weird stuff like at Google where, did you ever hear about the whole Google report thing or this guy just wrote up
men and women, the differences.
Yeah, like a summary of gender differences, and then he got fired and all that stuff. So it's really, and some of my friends say, well, if YouTube, this is just capitalism, and if YouTube has a full right to make whatever decision they want about their product, and if they're making bad decisions, then a competitor is going to come in,
right?
But a competitor is going to come in, which will be an alternative for the conservatives or for whoever, and that's just how capitalism works. What's weird though, and I wonder, is at what point does YouTube or some of these platforms like Facebook become the line between whether or not they're a product or a utility really blur? Because YouTube, there is no competitor. They were talking about this today on a podcast about how Facebook is such a massive company. At what point is it a monopoly? Where they bought WhatsApp for like $15 billion.
That's the thing that scares me is the amount of things that Facebook owns that we don't know they own.
Yeah.
Because Facebook as an app and as a website, I feel like is on the downtrend.
Yeah.
But the number of things that Facebook owns that are still marketed as other companies is the thing that freaks me out the most, because now it's like they don't even have the responsibility of honesty to their consumers.
Yeah.
And so like I'm just curious about like all these companies where if you just labeled them as the companies that own them, how many of them would just all be the same thing?
Yeah, and that's where like the question of whether or not it's a monopoly, and I mean Instagram as a competitor to Facebook, and then Facebook just buys Instagram. There's not a lot of competition there. And with YouTube being so massive and some of those platforms, it does start seeming like the platform is more of a utility. And so at what point do they need to not be regulated, but answer to some type of like...
What's crazy to me is like how regulated Twitter is. Someone can get their career ruined on Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
Who's regulating YouTube comments? I'm like looking through some YouTube comments.
Yeah,
I'm like, no one's career is getting ruined over this? This is absolutely crazy.
Oh, yeah,
it's those anonymous users.
Right.
Crazy ideas. There's a guy named Milo Yiannopoulos. Milo Yiannopoulos 2 years ago was so famous. During the election was huge. Oh, man, I have to pee soon. But
so do I. Do you want to take a pee break?
Gigantic. Pee break?
Let's take a pee break.
Milo,
all right, we'll come right back. Milo pee break.
Yeah, before we started succumbing to our mortal Milo Yiannopoulos. Pretty interesting story. This guy was super famous, super popular. Everybody was talking about him. Granted, most people hate him.
He just went off the map.
Yeah, Patrick Coffin had him on his podcast, and
then he just started getting banned. First it was Twitter, and then it was
what was it for? Wasn't it for his thoughts on relationships with like underage men or something.
Well, he had you can't really narrow it down. Like, he had a lot of freaking wild beliefs.
Yeah.
Well, I was so interested because he technically professed himself to be Catholic. Like, I mean, up to the point where he had his interview with Rogan. Mm-hmm. But then, I mean, at one point he did say, he's like, I'm a bad Catholic. Yeah. So, like, I don't exactly know what his allegiance is and, you know, his standing in Catholicism, but it was an interesting thing that, like, someone as popular as him who is homosexual could still be considering himself a good Catholic while living that lifestyle.
Yeah, he's an interesting...
He went through a few different phases. At one point, he came out super against gay marriage. He's like, look, I'm Catholic, I'm gay, I have these temptations, I have this disposition, but I don't act on it. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. What a cool guy. Then he got married to another man. I was like,
Yeah, he's done a lot of...
So he's sort of done a lot of things.
Why did we start talking about Milo?
We were talking about how the media has the ability to sort of, quote unquote, cancel.
Oh, yeah, deplatform people, yeah.
And Milo's guy really was, quote unquote, canceled in the sense that first he was off Twitter, then he was off this social media, then he was off that. And nowadays, the guy is incredibly in debt. I don't know if you've heard this.
No.
The guy's in super big debt.
Like lawsuits and stuff? Or
well, because he had this extravagant lifestyle and he got canceled. He lost all the sort of streams of income. He had all these things and all these taxes. And he posted this long Facebook thing about it, like, yeah, I'm in super big debt. Hope you guys buy my whatever because I want to get out of it. And you could argue some of it was sort of his 15 minutes of fame, like how much tolerance did us as a culture have for a platinum blonde homosexual man? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure he had a high tolerance, maybe.
I thought that was great. I thought that was hilarious. I recognize I'm not the average American. But at a certain point, he got canceled. He was banned from all these different places, banned from all these college campuses, and his quote-unquote brand suffered immensely. I think it's a real interesting question because these sort of social media platforms have so much power.
Yes. Yeah. And I think they're already trying to get ahead of, they're already trying to prevent the government coming in and trying to regulate them. They're trying to get ahead of that because that's what they don't want is something like that happening. I mean, all this weird stuff with the Facebook, Russia and the elections, that type of stuff. But what's so crazy if you've seen some of the trials and stuff, or like the court cases and stuff where the Supreme Court or whoever it was, these like congressmen are trying to understand
the internet.
The internet
oh
is
my gosh.
so ridiculous.
This one guy was like, so if I have Google and I move 10 feet to my left.
Yeah. Does it know?
Does Google know that I moved 10 feet?
Yeah. Does it know?
And like this guy's trying to explain the internet to a man who just clearly can't understand it. And I'm like, they're making legislation about net neutrality.
Officials, the best of us.
Yeah. And the other thing was like some of them didn't even know that Google didn't make the iPhone. Like they didn't even realize that Google and Apple were two different companies, which just seems like
this type of stuff is I'm like, wow, Supreme Court justices are in for life.
Oh,
I'm
gosh.
like, there's a big gap between when you stop making sense and when you die. And they're just a Supreme Court justice for that whole time.
It's crazy because our phones say designed by Apple. Right there on the back. It's like pretty legible for those who have
Well, the world's very confusing in 2018 if you're 85.
Oh my gosh.
Guess you need reading glasses.
I'm also like, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm legitimately terrified that like that's going to be me in 50 years.
It will for sure.
I'm just like constantly just like, because like at this point, like I literally am like, man, like my parents don't get it sometimes. My grandparents definitely don't get it. And I'm like just kind of like that reality that like I'm gonna be that way eventually.
Well, I think about this all the time. Like we were talking about the fractaling of what is mainstream. It's gonna be so hard. I have a hard time keeping up with everything, and I do think in some ways the internet brings us together, but in other ways it allows you to just like crank down on that one unique thing that you want to have a community about and just not see anything else. So it's really, I mean, granted, when something goes viral, quote unquote, it becomes like mainstream to a certain extent, but there are so many things going viral, it's hard to keep up on them.
Oh yeah, that fear of being without it. Like I remember, do you guys remember the first time you felt old? I remember the first time I felt like I was not with it. It was about 6 months ago. I just gone to a Young Lean concert and I assumed that this would buy me at least a few weeks of hipness. And I was talking to a buddy of mine. He's like, yeah, dude, I love Young Lean. But you know what I like more? Is Lil Xan. And I was like, that has to be a joke. No way there's a real rapper called Lil Xan. No way someone is unironically calling themselves Lil Xan. And then I looked it up and it was a 17-year-old kid named Diego who called themselves Lil Xan.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
I'm not as with it anymore as I used to.
Well, and it's tough too because you enter different stages of life, and you really like at some point you're kind of ushered into the next thing where like I'm not really allowed to be interested in that type of thing anymore. Like it's not really becoming, more or less.
Yeah.
You know, and you just kind of stick with whatever your age group type person does. You know?
Yeah, kind of like being 30 and riding around on a moped exclusively.
Who would ever do that?
I don't know.
Hope I do that when I'm 30. I'm going to be honest.
So Kyle, what can the listeners take away from this episode? What do you want to tell people to do?
Listeners take away from this
What
episode.
should they do?
What should they do? Well,
What should people take from this? What do you take from all this stuff with Kanye and all this stuff? Like like on a deeper level, why does this fascinate you?
On a deeper level, fascinates me because it's our culture. Because I see Kanye as one of the last few guys who is genuinely himself in the culture, in the rap game, quote unquote. I can't believe I just said rap game unironically as a white dude. But what I mean when I say that is that when I look at a guy like Drake, I see a guy who wants to do what appeals to the people to a fault. When I look at Kanye, I see a guy who wants to be himself also to a fault at times. If you take one thing away, it's that, look, if you listen to Kanye's music, you're going to get an experience of a man, not a man who's trying to fit to the culture, but a man who's trying to sort of fit the culture to himself, which I think is a really unique experience in 2018. So I recommend giving the guy a listen. And next time you meet someone who's a phony Drake fan.
So you're telling people who are listening, be more like Kanye and less like Drake.
Oh, absolutely. Be yourself. Follow your own speed. Don't try to be like anyone else. Try to be the man you were created to be. Look at the lives of the saints.
Yeah, stick it to the man.
Unironically so. Look at the lives of the saints. The saints are all gloriously different in their holiness and in their charisms. Now look at the life of every bum sinner you know, and I bet they're all really similar.
Yeah, it's interesting. This idea of holiness in Christianity is this idea that not that you become some like bleached version of, or some like safe sanitary version of yourself. In fact, it's this idea that you actually become more
yourself,
who you're supposed to be, like more you by like perfecting your potential, like to be, whether it's like goodness or truthiness or your potential for love or your potential for any of those things.
And I think one of the reasons that this whole thing went viral is that very few people are this brutally honest on social media, let alone someone as famous as Kanye West. And so I think that's one of the biggest reasons that it's garnered so much attention is that it's this type of unfiltered stream of consciousness that people are just like, wow, this is crazy. He thinks all of this and he's typing it right now and we're getting it
now. Yeah.
It's not curated. It's not filtered. It's just this is happening and it's happening live.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
People are looking for realness in this world, you know? And Kanye's realness, be it unfiltered, be it weird, be it mentally illness, is realness.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that people want. I think it's the reason why he's as popular as he is. Maybe not number one like Drake, but I think there's a reason why he has the following, and that's the following of devoted fans like myself, because I think he's a unique artist in that regard.
And I think one more thing too that's like weird about social media is I think social media is becoming its own like corporation to the point where even people who have social media, once you get a certain level of notoriety, you start letting other people take care of it.
Yeah.
And so now it's like you think you're interacting with someone on a personal level through social media, but actually you're interacting with their people who are running their social media.
Yeah.
And this has been something interesting with like so some of the work that I do for like comedians and stuff. With some other artists, we do like, it's like Comedy Content Collective on Instagram, but we do this thing where we try and like get people's attention, but we don't know if we're actually interacting with them or if we're interacting with their assistants.
Yeah.
You know, and this kind of like realization that like, oh, once you gain a certain level of like legitimacy, you now just have other people run that for you, and it's just an extension of your business.
Yeah.
And so, again, like, it's like that authenticity that people crave.
Yeah.
It's available on social media if you let it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's that same thing where people just kind of are like, well, it's the same kind of, like, curated stuff that I'm always getting.
It depends, though, because I know that, like, oh my gosh. Not D-Rock. The Rock.
Dwayne
apparently,
Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah, apparently he does all of his own social media, and Will Smith and some of those, because I've heard stories of other people saying that they got like DM'd by The Rock and immediately were like, is this some agent? Like who? Like is this his
Right.
agent? Like who? And he's like, no, it's me. You know, like
Right.
Like
I'm
so
doing
that's really
this.
cool to know that some people are doing stuff like that.
I run my own social media as well. I don't know about those guys.
So if you-
Edmund's got the most Instagram followers
Yes.
here.
So if you
but,
want to DM Kyle, you just you know.
I might not respond, but if I do, it's definitely me.
All right, guys, we'll take that to prayer, everyone, over the next couple weeks. You know,
Take that to prayer.
be
We all
more
went
like
to
Kanye, less
Franciscan.
like more like Kanye, less like Drake.
All right, Ober
Cheers.
out.
Any other announcements? Anything else you want to say before we end?
I got nothing to say.
Where can people find your podcast, Kyle?
Where can people find my podcast? Well, I'm actually going to tweet a link to this one.
Okay.
I've decided, or at least an Instagram story.
I
I'm not sure
will
what's
I will
on.
retweet Kyle's tweet.
Okay.
So
I just-
that's
I have-
Michael
Have you heard
Sherman
of
on
the app
Twitter.
Have you heard of the app Anchor?
I have heard of the app, but only on Edmund's Instagram stories.
Yeah, I feel like you could Anchor. You could just start a podcast just literally with an app and then on your phone.
Well, see, I'm worried to tweet about this. I'm gonna be honest. I have not had a tweet with less than 10 likes since not last summer 3 months ago, but last summer 15
You
months
talked about
ago.
this last
Humble
time you were on the
brag.
podcast.
And it hasn't stopped, Edmund. I'm scared to break that streak.
Yeah, you just have 10
You
friends.
just got to be real, Kyle.
Hey,
You just have 10 friends. Yeah,
wouldn't
be
you
more
love
like
to have 10 friends who rode and die for you like mine do?
Kyle, though, you are acting pretty Drake-ish here, though,
That's true.
by doing it just for the likes.
If anybody
Right?
wants to see some of my work,
very
Kyle, you
strong
gotta
points.
do it like Kanye, not like
Very
Drake.
strong.
Michael
Yeah.
Sherman design. I don't care how many likes I get,
Ooh,
but
yeah, find him on Instagram, Michael
Yeah.
Sherman Design.
That's very real.
it's tough. Sometimes I don't get the likes I want, but I keep it up there anyway. So
Because
I very
he's
much
like
respect
Kanye and not like Drake.
Unironically, I very much do respect that, kids. Expect a tweet. I'll think of a funny caption, though, because I'm going to kind of hit the middle of the road.
All right, okay.
Because you don't want to make this change all at once, because, like, I can't go from my Drake-ish Twitter
Oh,
ways.
let's give Kyle's music prescription of the week. If everyone could go listen to one song right now, what would you make them go listen to? One
Listen
song.
to one song. That's
Like if
a-
you could just give our audience a prescription, like they have to go listen to
oh,
this
it
one
has
song.
to be that Kanye song.
What do you mean that kind of... That means nothing to me. That can mean
Off the
anything.
last album, Fourth Dimension.
Fourth Dimension by Kanye West and Kid Cudi off the album. Kid C goes, it's a Christmas song. It's got Kanye. It's got Cudi.
Is it explicit? I'll add it to my Advent
It's
playlist.
definitely
It's-
explicit.
Okay.
It's also a certified banger.
I'll
Now,
add
if you're looking for a clean
Stamp
version,
of approval.
A Wonderful Christmas Time, the Shins cover is also incredible.
okay. I'll add that to the Advent playlist.
Advent Plays has like 50 followers. I checked it out and I was like, dang.
Oh, like 70, man.
Well, I checked that out a while ago. I kind of got on the waiver and I was like, also, it has like the same songs like 5 different times on
Oh,
there.
but done by different artists.
I'm aware,
I
but like, it's
appreciate it. I could listen to O Come O Come Emmanuel all Advent,
Yeah.
so I don't care who's singing it.
okay,
No, I
well,
put in some like confusing songs too a little bit.
No,
I mean, I
yes,
put in
you
some
did.
I put in
I
some
was very
strange ones.
confused.
No,
Don't Shoot Me Santa by the Killers.
I was explaining to someone, I was like, yeah, my youth minister has this weird cloud. Like, what do you mean? I was like, it's like a place like 50 followers on Spotify. Like, that's weird. I was like I said,
Wait.
weird.
Youth ministers are a weird.
my old youth minister has weird clout.
Weird cloud. How is that weird? What do you mean?
Because
it's
most
not a
people
lot.
when
Most
they-
people
no,
don't
no.
have 50 followers on a playlist.
That's just like
on
a weird
Spotify.
thing. Like most people when they hear cloud, they think like, like Twitter followers
Yeah.
or Instagram followers or this and
Yeah.
that. And Edmonds, all of his clout seems to be Spotify, which is a weird. It's
Wait, why is
odd.
that all my clout? What do you mean all of my clout is Spotify?
And then, like, you and I have a relatively similar amount of Instagram followers and likes on stuff. But
Okay.
you have way more Spotify clout than I do. And that's cool. That's a cool thing to have.
Okay, it's
That
so
is
weird.
not an insult.
okay,
That's cool.
All right. Sounds
Are there
good.
any Weird Al Christmas songs? 'Cause I feel like that would really throw people off.
Absolutely,
yeah.
there are. I
threw in
haven't
The
heard
Night
that, but
Santa
I
Went
guarantee
Crazy.
it.
That's a good
Yeah,
one.
I threw in some songs that are not directly Christmas or Advent themed, but like could augment
It
your
fits.
Advent.
Christmas in Harlem by Kanye
Like,
West. Banger.
Kyle, like sometime we should talk about the song "Ya Hey" by Vampire Weekend
Incredible
because
song.
it's
I
all
love Vampire
about
Weekend.
because it's all about Yahweh. It's all about like God. It's a very interesting, weird.
Dude, Vampire Weekend? Kyle's such a pony. He only listens to rap. Yeah, that's right. I like indie crap too.
Yeah, but Vampire Weekend they haven't put out anything since like 2015, I think.
If you want to get real technical, Ezra, the main guy, has been tweeting about how the album's done literally for the past 3 months. Do I believe him? No,
No.
I really don't.
No.
But
Anyways, go check out the Advent playlist. Just search Advent
Also,
2018.
Sting has a great Christmas album.
Oh,
If you're
really?
looking
also
to expand,
Sufjan
Wow.
He really
Stevens.
does. Yeah.
We could put
Sufjan
Toto's
Stevens
Africa in there too.
is an indie artist
Might as
who
well.
just makes half his music indie Christmas music. It's ridiculous. It's a 30-song Christmas album. That's absurd.
There were some songs that I really wanted to put on this list that I just, it was in that gray area of like, is this
Christmas?
Well,
Deck
no,
the
just
club.
I feel like I would get a little like hate mail because
Yeah.
of the inappropriateness of it.
Mm.
Like it was like marginally appropriate.
I feel like we're in kind of like the bonus track section of the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, once you get past an hour, it's only the real fans listen.
Oh yeah. yeah. That's when you can say stuff like, if you've listened this far, tweet this phrase and we'll know that you got this far.
I need to start just scrubbing to an hour into the podcast and listening.
All right, guys, it's been fun. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you have a wonderful December or January whenever this comes out.
All right. See you guys later.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Michael.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this is fun.